I recently just put the engine in this car and it was having a vibration when I drove it, like around 3,000 RPM. The whole car would sort of rattle and it would go away when I would put the clutch in, and it did it in every single gear. I pulled the engine out and had a bunch of things rebalanced. I'm gonna put it back in today. Fingers crossed, problem solved. I welded this myself, but it was professionally balanced, and there is evidence of little tabs that are like spot welded in some of these areas. This gland nut needs to have its threads completely clean and free of any old Loctite or any old grease or grime. So the threads on this work very well. And I've also checked that it can clamp all the way down to the dowel pins, including the washer. So that means when the flywheel's in place, it'll absolutely clamp it onto the crankshaft, and there won't be any sort of bottoming out of the bolt. Replacing the iron gasket should not affect the end play. So this shim right here is very important for the clearance of the bearing. This is actually one of the main bearings on the engine, and the flywheel controls how much play the crankshaft has from front to rear. And so this shim is a very important piece of the puzzle, so that when the flywheel's bolted in place, the end play is determined by that shim. So nothing should change. Even though the flywheel is balanced, the positioning of the snout of the flywheel is no different. Of course, I'll double check it when it's all assembled, but when I took it apart, it was 5/1000ths, which is within spec. The blue seal is the old seal and the brown is the new seal, and this actually wasn't leaking any oil, but when I took the flywheel off, I could see some of the seal was sort of melting and it was turning into like a goopy mess in between the two lips. This is the double lip seal, and this is the new seal. It's actually for a Volkswagen 36 horsepower, but this is a single lip. So the double lip has kind of two issues, or maybe two problems. One is that this part of the lip here actually rides on the radius of the flywheel, and I think the larger diameter of the radius causes a little too much friction on the outer part of the seal, and it creates a lot of heat and it starts to melt the seal. The other thing is that this is what they call the dust lip. This is the actual oil seal with a spring behind it. And in this application, we're not worried about dust because you have the whole transmission covering it, so you don't need a dust seal. And if it runs dry with high RPM, like this engine 6,000 RPM, it just can't lubricate the dust seal well enough, and it just disintegrates or starts to melt. That's why it's better to go with a single lip seal, and it's going to get oil from the engine. There's some little holes here that oil the flywheel and the seal, so this will always be wet with oil. This is, I think, the better option. So that's why I'm replacing it, even though this one wasn't leaking. And then putting the seal in should be pretty straightforward. I've already made sure this is nice and clean, no debris is in there. It feels smooth. And I'm going to use a little bit of the anaerobic gasket maker on this. You probably don't need to do this. I'm just going to put a very thin coating, especially right here on the seam, on the top and the bottom. But this is a rubber material, and I don't think it even requires this, but I'm going to put it in anyways. just because it's so much work to fix a leak here, you want to kind of throw all the tools at it. It's getting a little slippery. I need to get a little hammer to get that started. Hey guys, I was having a hard time getting that seal started just because the way it's a sharp corner here, and it's got a little chamfer, but it's pretty sharp, and then the seal itself has a little radius to it. So what I've done is I have an old gland nut, and it was really the same height as this gland nut. But what I did is I ended up cutting or grinding a part of the hex off just for the purpose of this tool. So I ruined the nut, but this has a much longer protrusion of threads now, so I think I should be able to get this started. Let's give it a try. Yeah, so it started threading in, before the radius kicks in. So that should work well. I'm just gonna give it some taps to try to make sure it's going in straight, because even though this is a nice big washer and it's supposed to go in straight, it's still having difficulty. So let me just give it some taps here. Seems to be working much better. Just want the same distance all around. And it looks like it's going in nice and straight. If it doesn't go in straight, what could happen is it could shave off part of the rubber and it could distort the seal to where it doesn't work. But this, I think, is going to work. Notice I'm not using the wavy washer because that would just make it worse. It's going in pretty straight now. Now that it's started, it goes straight in. These gaskets are definitely not reusable. This is a crushable iron gasket and you can't uncrush it. So this is trash, and I got another one. It's good to use one that came from like a original bag or something, so it's not been used for a trial fit or something. So this is a brand new one. It can be compressed. You don't want to compress it more than once, so that's the one. And this is installed completely dry. Only goes on one way, so just trying to find the pins. There I think, oh, nope. Can't seem to find it. I guess it's backwards, like maybe put it this way. There we go. It's normal for this seal to protrude out just a little bit. It doesn't need to be flush with this case. This is perfectly acceptable. It's about, I don't know, 1/16 of an inch or so. Just gonna put a tiny bit of oil on the seal. Not to get it all over the place, but basically just to lubricate it the second this thing starts up. Once it's running, it's gonna have plenty of oil. Looks like it's gonna go just like this. And it's gonna go through the seal, right onto the dowel pins. And then I'm going to go ahead and use my tool to seat the flywheel, and then I'm going to take it off and put a little bit of Loctite in there. But this should cinch it down onto those dowel pins, and then it shouldn't move from there. And watch how much I put on there. That's it. Notice it has these 3 pins, so that is the key to keeping it balanced. So I'll show you that in a second. Okay, I'm not so sure how much this next step is actually necessary, but this is green Loctite. And this has a penetrating quality to it so that it actually can go in after the fact. So I'm just going to dip it into those dowel pins, and I think that's going to prevent it from leaking, but the iron gasket should do the same thing. This is just double sure. This is my bathroom scale. This is pulling at about 5 feet, and I'm doing 80 pounds. That's 80 pounds right there. Just as the engine starts to tip, that's 400 foot-pounds, which is more than the required spec. This nut is super strong. It can go to 400, 450, no problem. So I think we're done there. It's going to pull the flywheel lock off and pull this whole starter adapter off so we can get the pressure plate on. There are some needle bearings in there, and that doesn't get engine oil. That has to be greased with something because the input shaft will spin inside those needle bearings when the clutch is in. I cleaned that surface too, just gave it some, I didn't take any material off, basically just gave it a little bit of scratch to it. Key to this thing being balanced is that the pressure plate has to be indexed to the flywheel. And so there's now 3 roll pins, one there, and one there. And that makes sure that it cannot move out of the center line. And then these 3 little dots down here, there's 3 dots. That corresponds to the 3 dots right here. I don't know if you can see 3 dots. That makes sure that this only goes on one way and it has no way to get out of balance. It's got to go at the right place. Okay, I'm not touching the friction material. I hate wearing gloves, but I'm not touching it. These are high-grade bolts, 10.9. And then we'll make sure the disc is centered before we really clamp down on this. I think this is the right input shaft to line this up. Yeah. So we want that to be right in the middle, putting a little pressure on the disc while it's centered, and it should stay there. And I just want to look at those pins and make sure it's not hanging up on the pins and smushing them over. Want to make sure the pins are going right inside those holes. So that one is perfectly lined up. That one's about halfway through the pressure plate, looking good. Now that it's seated, I think I'm going to take one at a time out, apply Loctite, put it back in, and then we'll go through and torque everything together. This slides in nice and easy. I'm going to go ahead and use this cheap flywheel lock tool just to torque the pressure plates. And then on these bolts, I'm using red Loctite, just 1 dab. And there's a look at those alignment pins. That's what is important. So even after these alignment pins were put in, it still required weight to be removed. And he removed it from the flywheel. You can't see it now because it's on the back side. But this did require an adjustment, and it did require the pinning. So I'm hopeful this is all we need now. The last thing to do is just real quick double check the end play. So I can push this and pull this in and out and get a number there. So I got it zeroed there. That's 0. I can push and I get 5. That's kind of what it was before. And I think the limit is from like 4 to 7. So we're in good shape here. That's 5, maybe 4.5. Just getting ready to put the engine back in. This fuel hose is new. Don't have any leaks or anything like that. But something I'm noticing now is this linkage here is really worn. See how the ball is got a lot of play in it? It's just worn out. So the distance here is more like, I'd say it's, 58, looking at the top scale there. So I'm going to, I think I only have one of these balls to replace, but I might have another better one. This is just going to kind of prevent it from going into full throttle. All that play in the linkage, there's so many joints in the total linkage that any play like that just prevents it from going full throttle. So. Okay, this just came in from the parts supplier, Pelican Parts. And there's absolutely no threads in here. This is incomplete junk part right out of the package. Right here it says carburetor linkage, ball socket, right hand thread, 4 per car. And there's no threads in this thing at all. That's pretty frustrating. This is why I hate buying new parts. I always have issues like this. It's in there. Now that it's in, I can lift it up much higher and get all the details connected, like the throttle linkage and all the good stuff. So should be running here in a few minutes. Okay, when I did the removal of the engine, I had some questions about how do you manage the upper bolts, because it's hard to get a wrench on both sides and the access from underneath the car isn't that great. And sometimes it's YouTube magic, and I apologize for that. I have the editor or the edit buttons to make things look easier than it is. But in this case, I'm going to show you what I do, and it's actually a modification to the bolt. This bolt has a little rod or little round tube welded to it. It's a solid bar. And all that does is it just prevents this from rotating. So I don't need a wrench on the bottom. I can tighten this upper bolt from the right side carburetor or the passenger side carburetor. All I have to do is reach in there with my ratcheting wrench and do a few cycles, and this bolt will not turn because it has that bar on it. And then for the driver's side, I do something similar, but you don't really need to modify the bolt. There's more room on the driver's side. So I start with the vice grips like this. I will clip the vice grips onto the bolt. I will go underneath the car and I will slip it in, and this is enough to prevent the bolt from turning while you tighten this side. And that's really all I do. second. Not even double clutching, guys. All right, the vibration's gone as far as I can tell. I revved it pretty high. Felt like the red line, but like the tachometer was only showing like 4,000. So I think it's not calibrated. Something's wrong with the tachometer. We'll get those issues sorted out. It could be because of the 12 volt, 6 volt issue. So I'm sure it's off. And, but I don't care because the car is running pretty well. A couple bugs to work out for sure. But number one, the vibration's gone. Number two, the transmission is fantastic. I upshifted, downshifted, all 4 gears, reverse. No problems getting in and out of gear. It actually feels great. And the brakes are working good, steering's working good. Like I said, a couple bugs to work out. Something is hesitating at around 2,500. It feels like it's kind of running out of fuel. So it could be a accelerator pump issue. It could be just a tuning issue with synchronization, or it could be that the main jets are wrong. But for now, I'm super excited, super pumped. The car is drivable, and I'm just gonna continue to work the bugs out of it. It's gonna be a car I'm gonna enjoy for a really long time. So thank you guys for hanging out with me, and we'll see you next week.